Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome back. We're reading the Constitution Annotated, Analysis and Interpretation of the U.S. Constitution. This is a tool that was made available to us online through an online resource in 2019. It's been available to the public since 1964, if I'm not mistaken. We read that over in the past. That's some cool history. But really, what we're doing here is we're starting a foundation and understanding the laws of the land, getting a better idea for the laws that we are implicitly consenting to each day of our lives. So here we go. We're going to continue going on. We are now at Intro 4.1, Overview of the Constitution Annotated Methodology. Beautiful stuff. Let's go ahead and get you on over here so you can see what we're working with. This essay explains the methodology for the current edition of the United States Constitution of the United States Analysis and Interpretation, commonly known as Constitution Annotated. That is the rules and principles that dictate the organization and construction of the document. We're understanding these are the rules and principles that dictate the organization and construction of this document. Consistent with the mission of the Library of Congress's Congressional Research Service. The Constitution Annotated provides an objective, comprehensive, authoritative, nonpartisan, and accessible treatment of one of the most, if not the most, contentious legal issues in modern American society: how to read and interpret the Constitution. As the only constitutional law treatise formally authorized by federal law, the Constitution Annotated functions as the official constitution of record, describing how the Constitution has been construed by the Supreme Court and the other authoritative constitutional actors since the drafting and ratification of the nation's founding document. In particular, the Constitution Annotated provides annotations addressing the historical origins and interpretation of each article and amendment of the Constitution. Producing such a treatise is a daunting task. While the Constitution and its current amendments contain a little more than 7,500 words, a seemingly endless stream of commentaries has attempted to explain the document's meaning and reach. The various sources, discussing the Constitution provide a vast array of modern interpretations of the Constitution and an immense challenge to any attempt to synthesize these sources in a single treatise. A further challenge is that the expositions of the Constitution, like other legal works, can be inaccessible to many readers because they are intended for a narrow audience of attorneys specializing in constitutional law, that is, a body of principles and rules derived from the Constitution. Also, perhaps because American constitutional law raises certain fundamental issues that define aspects of the U.S. political system, discussions of constitutional law often approach the Constitution with a distinct point of view that may obfuscate, politicize, or simply ignore key issues. In addition, the Constitution Annotated confronts the unique challenges that it is not intended to be a static document. Federal law requires that it be updated regularly by the Librarian of Congress, who has delegated this responsibility to the Congressional Research Service. With these challenges in mind, this essay seeks to provide a transparent methodology for the drafting of the Constitution Annotated and, in particular, for selecting sources for inclusion in the Constitution Annotated and organizing its content. It is anticipated that this methodology will guide future updates and revisions of the Constitution Annotated, ensuring a consistent approach over time. However, keeping that in mind, that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Certain departures from this methodology may be made in certain cases in either the current edition or future editions. Number 2, Information included in the Constitution Annotated. One key aspect of the methodology for the Constitution Annotated is its criteria for determining what source materials are to be considered and its drafting its annotations. Lacking such criteria, the Constitution Annotated would risk being inconsistent in its treatment of particular topics, thereby undermining its overall goal of providing objective, comprehensive, coherent, accessible, and authoritative information about how the Constitution has been construed. The following essays explain the overarching rules for determining when to incorporate particular types of sources within the Constitution Annotated. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. We can go ahead and pop on over here into 4.3.1, the treatment of Supreme Court cases generally. Supreme Court decisions addressing questions of constitutional law are primary sources of constitutional law. Understand that? Commonly used in compiling the Constitution Annotated. After all, the Supreme Court plays a prominent role in interpreting the Constitution, and no constitutional law treatise can credibly exist without a robust discussion of the Supreme Court's interpretations of the Constitution. Moreover, the statute underlying the publication of the Constitution Annotated requires that the Librarian of Congress provide annotations of decisions of the Supreme Court of the United States, construing provisions of the Constitution through the end of October of 1971 term, with the biennial updates and decennial editions thereafter. Specifically, this federal statute can be seen to impose three interrelated constraints upon the sources consulted in producing the Constitution Annotated. First, in keeping with the language regarding decisions of the court, the Constitution Annotated focuses primarily, but not exclusively, upon the Supreme Court's majority or plurality opinions, i.e., the ultimate determinations and dispositions on a matter by the Supreme Court. Separate opinions from the individual justices found in concurrences to and dissents from majority decisions are not, as a general rule, discussed in detail in the Constitution Annotated unless they 1. Provide insight into the majority opinions, for example, explain something that might be opaque from the majority opinion alone, or 2. Are eventually adopted by a majority of the court or otherwise influence future court decisions. Second, the authorizing statute requires a discussion of decisions that directly construe provisions of the Constitution. As such, the treatise's focus is on constitutional law. This restriction is at times challenging because constitutional law often serves as the foundation of other areas of law. However, as a rule, the Constitution Annotated does not discuss the other areas of law unless doing so is necessary to an understanding of specific constitutional issues. And third, while the statute mandates annotations of the court's constitutional decisions through the end of October 1971 term, it also contemplates the Constitution Annotated being updated on an ongoing basis to include cases from subsequent court terms. As a result, the Constitution Annotated generally differs in its treatment of cases from before October 1971 term and those of October 1971 term and subsequent terms. As a rule, decisions from earlier terms are noted, if at all, only in the background discussions, while decisions from later terms are noted in the text, in a footnote, or in the table appended to the Constitution Annotated. Of course, the statutory mandate from Congress to annotate decisions of the Supreme Court construing provisions of the Constitution begs the question of what it means for the court to interpret a constitutional provision. As one of the central actors in interpreting the Constitution, the Supreme Court regularly issues opinions that discuss and often provide the final word on how particular provisions of the Constitution are to be understood. Generally, The questions of whether to include a court decision in the Constitution annotated is relatively easy, as when the court asks whether a particular provisions of the Constitution permit certain acts by the political branches. Other decisions can be comfortably excluded because they focus on questions other than constitutional interpretation. For example, federal common law practices questions of statutory interpretations that do not touch matters of constitutional law. There are, however, certain gray or unsettled areas of constitutional law, where the choice of whether to include a decision, or even whether there is any court decision to include, is not so obvious. These areas frequently involve preemption, qualified immunity, habeas corpus, statutory claims, and common law doctrines, each of which is discussed separately in the essays that follow. Ya heard? You heard. You heard. You heard now. If you didn't hear before, you done heard now. I don't know what I'm doing, man. I don't know what I'm doing, man, but we're gonna make a separate video for that.